At what age should you start investing? The average American makes around $45,000. After taxes, it will leave him only with around $38,000. However, by the age of 35, most Americans, or the average American, has a net worth of around $16,000. Despite making around $45,000 a year, by the time the average American gets to 35, he first gets into the college and incurs a student debt. And then he needs a car to get around, which means that he will get an auto loan. And by the time he gets a mortgage, he's filled in debt, which means that his net worth at this point is entirely negative. However, as he starts paying off a portion of his mortgage, he starts building real equity, and his net worth after the age of 35 gets into the positive side, which allows him to build real wealth. Buying a house is the ultimate way to build wealth. Since house prices grow on average between 3 to 5% if you take out 2020 and 2021 when they have been growing by over 20% annually, which means that by the time the average American retires at the age of 50, 60, or 70, he will end up with a house that's worth around $500,000 up to a few $1,000,000, which can potentially make him a multi-millionaire by making the right investment of buying that house as early as possible. However, house prices have grown so much that the median house today is around $416,000, which is 11 times the average income. The vast majority of people simply won't be able to buy a house. But because we usually consider the household income, and that means that two people are working to be able to buy one house, it makes it a bit much easier. In fact, house prices have grown so much, or in other words, the dollar was devalued over the last 2 to 3 decades to the point where somebody with a $45,000 income can only afford a $200,000 house. And let's be honest, what can you possibly afford with a $200,000? And that led a lot of people to ask the most basic question: what if there is an alternative way to build wealth? How do these top 1% build their wealth that they end up with millions of dollars? Well, the average American barely gets a $200,000 house by the time he retires. What if there is a much better way to build wealth instead of the one that Americans have been using the last 100 years by buying a house? Now, let's take a hypothetical example and imagine that instead of buying a house, or maybe you are going to buy a house, but at the same time, you will allocate a portion of your income into investing into the stock market. Let's assume that we have 4 people and all of them plan to retire at the age of 65. The first one is John, who just recently turned 20 and he has plenty of time to start investing. The second one is Peter. He's 30 years old and he finally came across our channel and realized the importance of investing, and he's like, yes, I will start investing. Our third friend is Mike, who is 40 years old. He's far behind everyone else, but as they say, the best time to plant a tree was yesterday and the second best time is today. And our final person is Alex, who's 50 years old. He knows that he doesn't have plenty of time, but he has plenty of experience behind him. He might also have a house by this time. All of them will be investing the exact same amount, $500 per month. John will be the longest in the market for over 45 years, since he's 20, and by the time he will be 65, he has an entire life to live in. Over the course of 45 years, he will be investing $270,000. While that seems like a lot of money, that's the kind of money that you can put for a down payment for a decent house, he will be investing all of that money through a period of 45 years into the stock market. And let me make a clarification here. All of them will be investing in the most safest investment possible in the stock market. We're not talking about one particular stock. All of them will be investing into the S&P 500 that proved to be, over the long run, to provide you with a return of investment of 10% annually. By the time he's going to retire at 65 years old, he will be sitting on $3.5 million. Yes, he has invested $270,000, but now this investment has turned into $3.5 million, which gave him an investment growth of over $3 million and $170,000. So with just $500 investment per month, our friend John can simply retire. Even if he withdraws 5% annually from his investment portfolio, his money is not going to deteriorate year by year. In fact, it will continue to grow and will still provide him with at least $150,000 of annual income. And if you take that income and compare it to how much the average American is making today, which is around $45,000 and after taxes $38,000, that probably puts him at the top 5% of the highest earners. Our second friend, Peter, who is 30 years old, who also will be investing $500 per month. Now, he will be in the market for slightly shorter period of time of 35 years, and he will be investing $210,000. Do you see that the difference between these two people investing is very small because both of them are investing $500 per month? However, if you look at the difference at the final value, you will be shocked. John will make 3 times the amount that Peter is going to make. Yes, Peter will also end up with over $1 million in his portfolio, but now compare $1 million with $3.5 million. The difference is shocking. However, one started in his 30s, while the other started in his 20s. That's the kind of a difference that it can possibly make. But what about Mike, who is 40 years old, and he will be in the market just 25 years? He will be investing over the course of his career $150,000, which seems like a lot of money, to be honest. But again, if you compare it to how much Peter is investing, $150,000 compared to $260,000 or $10,000 isn't that big of a difference. However, here is the real difference. The final value at the age of 65 for Mike will be $400,000. He won't even make $500,000 simply of a 10 years difference. Now compare how much Mike is making to John at over $3.5 million. And his investment is going to grow by $259,000. Again, a third of what Peter is making. Now let's go to our final friend, who is Alex in his 50s. He will be 15 years in the market. Since he's 50, he will retire at 65. He has 15 years in the market. He will be investing simply $90,000. Now, $90,000 might seem like a lot of money, but what is $90,000? Most people can make that in a single year. His $90,000 are probably almost going to double over this period, and he will retire with $158,000. I want you to pay attention how much of a difference does it make when you start early. The exact same $500 per month is going to make John a multi-millionaire with over $3.5 million in his portfolio, while Alex will retire with less than $200,000. In fact, John can even sell a portion of his income and buy a house. Or maybe even John can probably buy a house or take a mortgage when he is 25, 30, or 35 years old and end up with $3.5 million and a house. The only difference is that one person thought about it very early and started investing even a small amount of money into the market as early as it possibly can. So what exactly is happening over here? It's all because of compound interest. Einstein called compound interest as the 8th wonder of the world because it allows your money to earn more money. Now, if $500 in the beginning doesn't seem like a lot of money because it's not a lot of money, over time, your $500 will earn $1. And then now $501 are earning you money. And over time, it's going to compound and compound and compound. And based on the rule of 72, if you are making 10% annually, every 7 years, your money is going to double. So when $1,000 doubles, it's not a lot of money. When $10,000 doubles into $20,000, it's slightly more meaningful, but it's not really a lot of money. When $100,000 doubles, it's $200,000. It can make a difference. When $1 million doubles, it's already $2 million. It's the kind of money that can change your life. So the longer it's in the market, the faster it's going to double and the wealthier you're going to get. And that is the fundamental difference why the rich people keep getting richer while the vast majority of people look at the top 1% and cannot possibly realize what exactly is happening. Now let's try to answer a very basic question. How much of monthly investment is it required for anybody to retire with $1 million assuming that they will retire at the age of 65. If John wants to retire with $1 million at the end of the day, he will have only to invest $165 per month. That's a little over $5 per month. That's basically not buying a Starbucks coffee every morning, and instead of taking that money and investing into the stock market, and you will retire with $1 million. I'm not telling you that you should stop buying Starbucks coffee, but I simply want you to imagine how much of a difference it's going to make. If Peter wants to retire with $1 million, he will have to invest triple this amount at $440 already per month to be able to retire with $1 million. Now, the difference is huge. Simply because John started much earlier, he has this huge advantage. And in his 30s, he will be able to continue simply investing $165 and still retire with $1 million portfolio. If Mike decides to retire with $1 million portfolio and he's starting when he's 40, he has to invest $1,200 per month. That is 8 times the amount that John has to invest. And finally, Alex will have to invest triple this amount at $3,200 to be able to retire with $1 million when he's 65 years old. And the only difference between these 4 people is that the longer you are in the market, the more money you're going to make. And that is why it is fundamentally important that you get into the market as early as possible. Here's a fundamental difference between getting a house to build wealth and stocks. I don't have anything against houses. Buying a house is one of the best things that you can possibly do. It will give you a peace of mind. Knowing that you have a roof over your head is fundamentally great feeling because you know that no matter what happens, you have a place to stay. However, the problem with building wealth with houses is that you start very early. The average American gets his mortgage at the age of 34, and that means that he's wasting 16 years of his life. When he turns 18, he's thinking about getting into the college. But to get into college, you have to get a student debt. And then without the car, it's probably impossible to move around in most cities, which means that you will have to get yourself a car. And 16 years later, you will finally save money for a down payment and get into the JP Morgan or Citibank and get your first mortgage at the age of 34. And because in the world of investing, time is everything, you have already wasted 16 years of your life. This is the period that you should have used in order to build the fundamentals of your wealth. So by the time you're 34, you have already built that kind of a portfolio that exponentially grows on its own. If you have taken your mortgage when you're 18 years old, that is fantastic. That is great. But very few people have that kind of a chance. Unless you have very rich parents and your dad will give you a small loan of $1 million, you probably can do that. This is not because people don't want to buy houses, but because house prices have grown so much that the average person cannot possibly get a house with the type of income that they're getting. Student loans are also growing. Look at the tuition fees at the universities over the last 15 to 20 years. They have grown exponentially. To go to the top colleges in the country, it's probably around $100,000 per year. And these numbers are even growing faster, which means that people will take their first mortgage at a later age of their lives. Maybe in 5 to 10 years from now, the average age to get a mortgage will be like 38 or 39. Maybe it will someday reach 40. That means that you're wasting 20 years of your life where you could have been building wealth, but you couldn't because you were saving for the down payment. You were trying to pay off your student debt or a car debt, and you cannot possibly go and get your house with $200 investment every single month. And that's where the difference comes with the stock market. With the stock market, your wealth can exponentially grow to millions of dollars. But the problem is that most people don't see this big picture. Most people are focused in the beginning. Because when you get into the stock market and you start investing $500, $1,000, $5,000, and a year passes and you don't see a huge difference, you start giving up. You stop contributing into your portfolio. But the moment you reach your $100,000 milestone, your wealth starts growing exponentially. And this is where most people give up. And that's why I realized that if people achieve this milestone, it's over. They will see that their wealth is growing exponentially and they see how they can go to millions of dollars. And that's why I laid down a step-by-step plan on how you can get your first $100,000 in the stock market. After that, it is going to get a lot easier. Now, to find that out, you can check the first link in the description of this video.